Maybe you should give Jennifer the address. She hasn't been able to get back to her pre-baby weight. I keep telling her she needs to make it a priority, but you know how it is.
The words came out of Robert Anderson's mouth like he was commenting on the weather, casual and cutting, with a laugh that made it worse. Maybe you should give Jennifer the address. She hasn't been able to get back to her pre-baby weight. I keep telling her she needs to make it a priority, but you know how it is. Jennifer Anderson stood 3 feet away from her husband in the hotel ballroom, champagne flute trembling in her hand, and felt the ground shift beneath her heels. The two couples in their small circle went awkwardly silent. Eyes darted to the floor, to the ceiling, anywhere but her face. One of the wives, a woman whose name Jennifer couldn't remember, forced a bright smile and changed the subject to something about vacation homes. Robert didn't notice, or maybe he did and didn't care. He was already moving on, his hand resting possessively on Jennifer's lower back, talking about interest rates and commercial zoning like he hadn't just announced to a room full of strangers that his wife's body was a project he was managing. This was the first formal event Jennifer had attended in nearly 3 years. The first time she'd worn a dress that wasn't forgiving at the waist. The first time she'd applied makeup that took longer than 2 minutes. The first time she'd stood in a ballroom, surrounded by her husband's colleagues, and tried to remember what it felt like to be seen as something more than a mother who hadn't slept through the night since childbirth. She'd come tonight because Robert insisted it mattered for his business. He'd said she needed to make an effort. And she had. God, she had tried. Her mother had agreed to watch Emma for the evening, her 2-year-old daughter with Robert's dark hair and her own stubborn chin. Jennifer had spent hours getting ready. She'd chosen a navy dress that fit her body as it was now, not as it had been before pregnancy reshaped every inch of her. She'd told herself tonight would be different, that Robert would look at her the way he used to, back when her intelligence mattered more than her dress size. But he hadn't looked at her that way. In the car, his gaze had traveled over her with the clinical assessment of a building inspector noting structural flaws. He'd said she looked nice, like she'd barely passed an exam. And now this. Jennifer stood perfectly still, her face composed in a careful smile, and felt something crack open inside her chest. A boundary she didn't know existed, the line between private cruelty and public erasure, had just been obliterated. She'd heard Robert make comments before. For 2 years he'd mentioned her weight, suggested gym memberships, watched what she ate with the attention of an accountant reviewing expenses. But he'd never said it publicly, never announced to people whose opinions he valued that his wife was failing to meet his standards. Her gaze drifted across the ballroom, past clusters of men in expensive suits and women in cocktail dresses, past the silent auction tables and the bar where servers poured wine into crystal glasses. And then her eyes landed on a man standing near the far wall. Donovan Hayes. He wasn't surrounded by people, but somehow he commanded the space anyway. And he wasn't looking at Robert. He was looking at her. His expression was calm, unreadable, but it wasn't pity. It was something else. Recognition. The kind of look that said he'd witnessed exactly what just happened, and he was filing it away. Jennifer had met Donovan Hayes once before, years ago at a different charity event, back when she still worked in corporate strategy and could hold conversations about competitive positioning without her brain fogging from sleep deprivation. They'd talked for 10 minutes about scenario planning frameworks while Robert networked across the room. Donovan had listened to her like her words carried weight, like she was a person worth paying attention to. Now he was watching her absorb her husband's public contempt with the stillness of someone who didn't miss details. And something about being seen in this moment, not pitied but acknowledged, made the humiliation sharper and stranger all at once. Jennifer set her champagne on a passing server's tray and turned to Robert. Her voice came out calm and even, a skill she'd learned from 2 years of soothing a crying infant. "I have a headache. I'm going to head home. I'll call a car." Robert glanced at her, barely breaking stride in his conversation. "Yeah, okay. Feel better." He didn't ask if she was all right. Didn't walk her to the door. Didn't register that his wife was leaving a fundraiser barely an hour after arriving, or that the carefully neutral expression on her face was costing her everything she had left. Jennifer walked toward the exit with her spine straight and her head high, navigating through tables and conversations and people whose names she'd forgotten. She smiled at an acquaintance who tried to catch her eye. She murmured polite goodbyes. She moved through the ballroom like she had somewhere important to be, like this was planned, like she wasn't disintegrating inside. She didn't look back. Outside, the October air was cool against her flushed skin. She stood on the hotel steps and opened a car service app with shaking hands, ordered a ride, and waited. 4 minutes. The car pulled up. She slid into the back seat and gave the driver her address, her voice steady, even though her heart was hammering against her ribs. The city lights blurred past the window. Jennifer watched without seeing, her mind replaying the moment on an endless loop. Maybe you should give Jennifer the address. She hasn't been able to get back to her pre-baby weight. Each repetition peeled back another layer of the marriage she'd been trying so hard to preserve. She cataloged every comment Robert had made about her body over the past 2 years. Every time his affection felt contingent on her appearance. Every morning she'd woken before dawn to shower and dress before Emma stirred, hoping that if she just looked put together enough, his warmth would return. The pattern had always been there. She'd just been too exhausted, too isolated, too desperate to make things work, to see it clearly. Robert's love had terms and conditions. It existed when she met his standards and evaporated when she didn't. Tonight, he'd made those terms public. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "How's the event, sweetheart?" Emma went down perfectly at 7:30. Jennifer typed back quickly, "Leaving early. Headache. I'll be home in 20 minutes. Her mother responded immediately. "Oh no. Do you need me to stay?" "No, I'm fine. Thank you, Mom." The car pulled up to the house, a beautiful colonial in a neighborhood full of families that looked perfect from the outside. Jennifer paid the driver, added a generous tip, and let herself in through the front door. Her mother was on the couch reading a magazine. She looked up, concern immediate on her face. "You're back so soon, are you okay?" Jennifer forced a smile, the same composed mask she'd worn all evening. "Just a headache. How was Emma?" "An angel, as always." Her mother stood, gathering her purse, but her eyes stayed on Jennifer's face. "Are you sure you're all right? You look pale." "I'm fine, Mom. Really, just tired." Her mother hesitated, clearly unconvinced, but she didn't push. She hugged Jennifer, whispered to call if she needed anything, and left. The house fell silent. Jennifer climbed the stairs to Emma's room and stood in the doorway, watching her daughter sleep. Emma was curled on her side, clutching a stuffed rabbit, her breathing soft and rhythmic. She looked peaceful, safe, loved. Jennifer's chest constricted. She'd given this child everything. Her body, her career, her identity, her sleep. She'd grown Emma inside her, nourished her, brought her into the world through pain that rewired her entire nervous system. Her body still carried the evidence: stretched skin, extra weight, exhaustion carved into her face. Robert looked at that evidence and saw failure. But standing here in the glow of the nightlight, Jennifer saw something else. She saw devotion. The kind of love that hollows you out and fills you simultaneously. The kind that deserves reverence, not critique. She kissed her fingertips and pressed them gently to Emma's forehead, then pulled the door almost closed and walked to the master bedroom. The room felt cavernous and cold. Jennifer slipped out of her dress, hung it carefully in the closet, scrubbed the makeup from her face and brushed her teeth. She pulled on pajamas and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Amanda, a woman she'd known from her old office, someone she used to have lunch with before Emma was born. "Heard you left the gala early. Everything okay?" Jennifer stared at the message. Word was already spreading. Someone must have mentioned it to someone else, the way news always traveled through overlapping social circles. By tomorrow, people would be talking, some uncomfortable with what Robert said, others agreeing that Jennifer had let herself go, still others just enjoying the minor drama of watching a marriage crack in real time. Jennifer didn't respond. She set the phone on the nightstand, turned off the light, and lay down in the dark. Sleep wouldn't come. She stared at the ceiling and listened to the house settle around her. Sometime after midnight, she heard Robert's car in the driveway. The front door. His footsteps on the stairs. He was humming. Robert came into the bedroom smelling of bourbon and expensive cologne, slightly unsteady, but in a good mood. The event had gone well for him. A deal was progressing. Connections had been made. He didn't turn on the light, assuming she was asleep. He changed into pajamas, brushed his teeth, and slid into bed beside her. He leaned over and kissed her forehead, his breath warm and sweet with alcohol. "Hope you're feeling better," he murmured. Jennifer kept her breathing slow and even, pretending to sleep, because she didn't trust herself to speak without breaking. Robert settled onto his side, asleep within minutes. He had no idea that he'd detonated something fundamental inside her, no idea that the boundary she didn't know she had was now a crater, no idea that the woman lying beside him in the dark was cataloging every moment of their marriage and finding it unbearably lacking. Jennifer lay awake until the room lightened with dawn, and by the time morning came, something inside her had shifted irrevocably. She couldn't name it yet, couldn't articulate what it meant or what came next. But the performance was over. The years of trying to earn Robert's conditional love by shrinking herself, physically, emotionally, existentially, were finished. Jennifer didn't know what would replace it, but lying there watching gray light creep across the ceiling, listening to her husband sleep peacefully beside her, she understood with devastating clarity that she could not continue living this way. The fracture was complete. The next 3 days passed in a fog of eerie normalcy. Jennifer moved through her routines with mechanical precision. She fed Emma breakfast, managed the household, folded laundry, answered emails from Robert's assistant about upcoming events. She was present but not engaged, functioning but not feeling. Robert didn't notice, or if he did, he misread it entirely. On the second morning after the gala, over breakfast, he glanced up from his phone and asked if she was feeling better. "Fine," Jennifer said, spooning yogurt into Emma's mouth while her daughter babbled happily about a bird she'd seen outside. "Good. You seemed off the other night." Off, like she was an appliance malfunctioning. Jennifer wiped Emma's face with a cloth and didn't respond. Robert returned his attention to his phone, scrolling through emails. "I have a big meeting today. Donovan Hayes. Could be a major partnership if it goes well." Jennifer looked up. Donovan Hayes, the man who'd watched her absorb public humiliation without intervening, whose expression had registered the moment like it mattered. "That's good," she said evenly. Robert nodded, still focused on the screen. "Hayes doesn't work with just anyone. If he partners with a firm, it opens significant doors." He said it like victory was inevitable, like his confidence alone would close the deal. Jennifer lifted Emma from the high chair and carried her to the living room, set her down with wooden blocks. Robert followed, coffee in hand. "This could be a game changer for us, for the family." Us. Family. Words that used to mean partnership but now just felt like his career ambitions dressed up in collective pronouns. "I'm sure it will go well," Jennifer said, because that's what Robert wanted to hear. She was still performing the role of supportive wife, not because she wanted to, but because she didn't yet know how to stop. Robert left for the office 20 minutes later, kissing Emma on the head and Jennifer on the cheek with the same absent affection. The door closed. The house fell silent. Jennifer stood in the kitchen, hands braced on the counter, staring out the window at the perfectly manicured backyard. She should feel something. Anger, grief, resolve. But all she felt was hollow. Her phone buzzed. An email from an address she didn't immediately recognize. She opened it. "Hi Jennifer, this is Marcus Webb. We worked together at Collins & Associates a few years back on the Brennan Logistics project. I heard through Rachel Kimura that you might be considering consulting work. I'm running my own firm now, supply chain optimization, and I could use someone with your strategic mind. Any interest in grabbing coffee to discuss?" Jennifer stared at the message. Marcus Webb. She remembered him. Sharp, competent, one of the few men in that office who didn't talk over women. They'd collaborated on a project that saved their client $2 million in operational costs. He'd been impressed with her work, had told her so directly. That was 4 years ago, a lifetime ago, before she became Mrs. Robert Anderson, and then Emma's mother, and then a woman who couldn't remember the last time someone valued her professional opinion. She started typing a response, then stopped. Was she considering consulting work? She hadn't worked in 3 years. Her credentials were outdated. Her network had withered. And who would watch Emma while she worked? Robert certainly wasn't adjusting his schedule, and hiring childcare would mean admitting that staying home wasn't enough for her, which would give Robert ammunition she didn't want him to have. Jennifer deleted the half-written response and set the phone down. But the message stayed with her, a door she didn't realize was still open. That afternoon, while Emma napped, Jennifer did something she hadn't allowed herself to do in years. She opened her laptop and searched for job listings in corporate strategy. Not to apply, just to look, just to see what was out there, what she might be qualified for, whether her old career still existed in any form she could access. The postings were intimidating. Senior strategist, director of operations, competitive salary, advanced degree preferred, 5+ years of recent experience required. She had the degree. She'd had the experience once. But recent was the problem. The 3-year gap in her resume was a canyon, and she knew exactly how hiring managers looked at women who stepped away for children. They saw risk, unreliability, outdated skills, Jennifer closed the laptop and put her head in her hands, fighting the familiar wave of hopelessness. Emma woke 30 minutes later, cheerful and demanding snacks. Jennifer pulled herself together, sliced an apple, turned on a cartoon, and let her daughter's simple joy anchor her back to the present. But the numbness was cracking. Beneath it, something sharper was beginning to surface. That evening, Robert came home late, in a surprisingly good mood. The meeting with Donovan Hayes had gone well, he said. Hayes hadn't committed to anything, but he'd asked detailed, intelligent questions and requested a follow-up meeting. Robert interpreted this as strong interest. He talked through dinner about the potential project, the ROI projections, the prestige of partnering with someone like Donovan Hayes. Jennifer nodded at appropriate intervals, made affirming sounds, but she wasn't really listening. She was watching Robert perform enthusiasm about his work, and she realized with quiet devastation that she didn't care whether his deal succeeded or failed. His victories used to feel like their victories. Now they just felt like his. After Emma was in bed, Robert suggested they watch a movie together. Jennifer said she was exhausted and went upstairs. She lay in bed scrolling her phone, reading articles she didn't retain, waiting for sleep that wouldn't come. Robert joined her an hour later, already drowsy. He reached for her in the dark, his hand sliding to her hip, his intention unmistakable. Jennifer's entire body went rigid. She wasn't in the mood, hadn't been in months, maybe longer. Every time Robert touched her now, it felt mechanical, transactional, like he was checking a maintenance box on the marriage to-do list. She didn't say no. She never said no, because saying no led to conversations about her being distant or possibly depressed, and she didn't have energy for those conversations. So she let it happen, her mind 1,000 miles away, her body going through memorized motions. When it was over, Robert kissed her shoulder and rolled away, asleep within minutes. Jennifer lay in the dark staring at the ceiling, feeling lonelier than she'd ever felt in her life. And that's when the second fracture happened. Quiet, devastating. This was what her marriage had become. A series of performances she delivered to keep the peace, to meet Robert's needs, to maintain the illusion of normalcy. She wasn't a partner. She was a supporting actor in his life, and her role was to make him look good and feel satisfied. She'd agreed to none of this, but somewhere along the way the terms had shifted, and she'd been too exhausted to notice until it was too late. Jennifer slipped out of bed and walked to Emma's room. She stood in the doorway watching her daughter sleep, and she made a silent promise. I won't teach you that love looks like this. Because if Jennifer stayed, if she kept performing and accepting conditional affection and allowing Robert to measure her worth by her waistline, Emma would grow up watching. She'd learn that a woman's value is contingent. That sacrifice goes unrecognized. That love requires making yourself small. Jennifer couldn't let that happen. She returned to the bedroom, carefully retrieved her laptop from the closet, and carried it to the guest room down the hall. She closed the door, sat on the bed, and opened a search engine. She typed, "Divorce attorney near me." The results loaded. Pages of law firms with professional websites and client testimonials. People who'd navigated custody agreements and asset division, and the legal dissolution of marriages they'd tried so hard to build. Jennifer didn't click any links. Not yet. But she didn't close the browser either. She sat in the dark guest room, the laptop's glow illuminating her face, and let herself imagine what leaving would look like. Taking Emma and moving to an apartment somewhere, rebuilding a career from scratch, co-parenting with a man who barely parented now, explaining to a 2-year-old why mommy and daddy didn't live together anymore. The logistics were terrifying. But for the first time in 2 years, the idea felt less like disaster and more like hope. Jennifer bookmarked 3 attorney websites, then closed the laptop and sat in silence, her heart pounding, her mind racing with questions she couldn't yet answer. When she finally returned to the master bedroom, Robert was still asleep, oblivious. Jennifer lay down carefully, making sure not to touch him, and stared at the ceiling until morning light crept across the room. She'd taken the first step. She'd allowed herself to imagine a different future, and that felt monumental. A week passed, then another. The rhythm of Jennifer's days didn't change outwardly, but internally she was shifting in ways she couldn't yet articulate. She started paying attention to the bank accounts. Robert managed their finances, and Jennifer had always trusted him to handle it. But now she logged into the online portal and studied the balances, the monthly expenses, the money that flowed in and out. Most of the assets were in Robert's name, from before the marriage or inherited from his family. Their joint account held household funds. Jennifer had a small savings account from her working years that she'd nearly forgotten about, untouched for 3 years, holding just over $8,000. She transferred that money to a new account at a different bank, an account in her name only. It wasn't much, but it was hers. And having it felt like building a lifeboat in the middle of a storm. She also started documenting things. Robert's work schedule, the hours he spent with Emma versus the hours she did, the times he canceled weekend plans with their daughter for business obligations, the way he spoke to Jennifer when he was frustrated versus when he wanted something from her. She wasn't doing it vindictively. She was doing it because if she ever filed for divorce, she'd need evidence for custody arrangements. She'd need to demonstrate that she'd been Emma's primary caregiver, that her life had bent entirely around their daughter's needs while Robert's had not. On a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after the gala, Jennifer's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Hello? Hi, is this Jennifer Anderson? The voice was female, warm, vaguely familiar. Yes? This is Rachel Kimura. We met a few years ago at a Women in Business event. I don't know if you remember. I remember, Jennifer said, because she did. Rachel had been VP of marketing at a tech startup, sharp and funny, and generous with advice. Oh good. Listen, I'm calling because I'm organizing a panel discussion next month about women re-entering the workforce after parenting breaks. It's part of a professional development series. I was talking to Marcus Webb. He mentioned he'd reached out to you about consulting, and your name came up. I thought you might be interested in attending, not as a speaker, Rachel added quickly. Just as a guest. I think the conversation could be valuable. Jennifer's pulse quickened. Marcus must have mentioned her to Rachel, even though she'd never responded to his email. When is it? Jennifer asked. Thursday, November 10th, 2 o'clock at the Riverside Conference Center. I can send you details if you're interested. Jennifer thought about her schedule. Robert wouldn't be home. She'd need someone to watch, Emma. But her mother would do it. Her mother always said yes when Jennifer asked. She should say no. She hadn't been to a professional event in 3 years. She didn't even know if she wanted to re-enter the workforce. The logistics of childcare and Robert's inevitable questions felt overwhelming. But the word that came out of her mouth was, yes, send me the information. They talked for a few more minutes about the panel format and what to expect. When Jennifer hung up, she felt something unfamiliar rising in her chest. Not quite hope, but maybe the shadow of it. The sense that there was a world beyond her marriage where she was still Jennifer Anderson, the strategist, not just Robert's wife or Emma's mother. That night, after Emma was in bed, Jennifer sat across from Robert at the dining table. He was scrolling through his phone, half present as usual. I've been offered some consulting work, Jennifer said. Just a small project, remote and flexible. Robert looked up, surprised. Consulting? For who? Marcus Webb. We used to work together. He's running his own firm now, doing supply chain optimization. Robert's expression shifted into something between confusion and dismissal. We don't need the money, Jennifer. And what about Emma? You can't exactly work from home with a toddler running around. There it was. The assumption that her time was infinitely flexible, infinitely available, because it wasn't monetized in a way he respected. I'd work during her nap time and after she goes to bed, Jennifer said evenly. Maybe your mother could watch her 1 afternoon a week if I need uninterrupted time. Robert frowned. That seems like a lot of effort for what? A couple $100? What's the point? Jennifer looked at him across the table. For 2 years she'd softened her truths, edited her needs, made herself smaller to avoid conflict. But something had shifted since the gala. Something had cracked open, and she couldn't seal it back up. The point is that I want to do it, she said quietly. Robert blinked, clearly taken aback by her directness. He studied her for a moment, then shrugged. Okay, I guess, if it makes you happy, just don't let it interfere with everything else. Everything else? The cooking, the cleaning, the child care, the household management, the emotional labor of keeping their life running smoothly. Her potential paid work was already being framed as extracurricular, something she could do only if it didn't inconvenience him. Jennifer nodded, not trusting herself to say more without her voice shaking. She stood and began clearing the table. Robert returned to his phone, already uninterested. That night, Jennifer opened her laptop in the guest room and responded to Marcus Webb's email. Hi Marcus, I apologize for the delayed response. I'd be very interested in discussing consulting work. Does next week work for coffee? She hit send before she could second guess herself. Then she opened one of the bookmarked divorce attorney websites and filled out a contact form requesting a free consultation. She didn't schedule anything yet, but she gathered information. She read about custody laws and asset division and spousal support. She learned what questions to ask, what documents to gather, what a separation timeline might look like. She was building a map of a future she hadn't fully committed to but could no longer ignore. The panel discussion was held on a Thursday afternoon at a modern conference center downtown, in a bright room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. Jennifer arrived 15 minutes early, her palms damp, her stomach tight with nerves. She'd left Emma with her mother that morning, citing a doctor's appointment. It was a small lie, but she wasn't ready to explain to Robert, or even to her mother, that she was attending a professional development event. That would require explaining why it mattered, and she didn't have words for that yet. The room was filling with women. Some wore business casual and carried leather portfolios. Others dressed more casually, looking nervous and hopeful and determined. Jennifer recognized the expression because she was wearing it too. Rachel Kimura spotted her from across the room and waved, navigating through the growing crowd. "Jennifer, I'm so glad you came." They hugged briefly. Rachel's warmth felt like oxygen after years of holding her breath. Rachel introduced her to a few other attendees, women with stories that echoed Jennifer's own. Careers paused for motherhood, identities reshaped, ambitions shelved but not forgotten, skills dormant but not dead. Jennifer found a seat in the middle of the room and settled in, notebook open on her lap even though her hands were shaking too much to write. The panel began. 4 women sat on stage, each with a different story of stepping away and finding a path back. One had returned to corporate law after a 6-year gap. Another started a consulting business from her kitchen table. A third retrained entirely in a new field. The fourth negotiated a part-time executive role that allowed her to balance work and parenting on her terms. They talked about the identity crisis of early motherhood. The way society treats mothers as less competent professionally assumes they're less committed, less sharp, less serious. They talked about the guilt of wanting something beyond parenting, the challenge of rebuilding networks, the imposter syndrome that whispers you're too far behind to catch up. Jennifer listened, and with every sentence, she felt something inside her loosen and release. She wasn't alone. She wasn't broken. She wasn't the only woman who'd lost herself in the machinery of marriage and motherhood and was now trying to remember who she used to be. One of the panelists, a woman named Carla who'd returned to finance after a 7-year gap, said something that landed in Jennifer's chest like an anchor finding solid ground. "The hardest part wasn't convincing a hiring manager I was still competent. It was convincing myself. I'd internalized the narrative that stepping away made me less valuable, that I'd lost something essential. But the truth is, I hadn't lost anything. I'd gained skills, project management under impossible constraints, negotiation with tiny irrational humans, crisis management on no sleep, functioning when every system is broken. I just had to learn how to name those skills in language the professional world recognizes." The room was utterly silent. Jennifer wrote it down, her handwriting shaky but urgent. "You didn't lose anything. You gained skills." After the panel ended, there was coffee and networking. Jennifer forced herself to stay, to talk to strangers, to exchange contact information with women who understood what it felt like to rebuild from wreckage. Rachel found her near the end of the hour. "How are you doing, really?" Jennifer hesitated. She barely knew Rachel anymore, but something about the safety of this space, these women, this moment made honesty feel possible. "I'm trying to figure out what my life looks like if I choose myself," Jennifer said quietly. Rachel's expression softened with immediate understanding. "That's the hardest work there is. But Jennifer, you were one of the most brilliant strategists I ever met. You still are. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." When Jennifer left the conference center, the city felt different. Sharper, more full of possibility. She sat in her car for a long moment before starting the engine, her hands resting on the wheel, her mind turning over everything she'd heard. She pulled out her phone and opened Marcus Webb's last email. She typed, "Coffee sounds great. I'm available Tuesday or Wednesday next week. Let me know what works." She hit send. Then she drove to her mother's house to pick up Emma, and when her daughter ran into her arms, Jennifer held her tight and whispered, "Mommy's figuring some things out, baby girl, but it's going to be okay." Emma didn't understand, but Jennifer needed to say it aloud, needed to hear herself make the promise. That night, Robert asked where she'd been. She said she'd had an appointment. He didn't ask what kind. He was distracted, frustrated that Donovan Hayes still hadn't confirmed the next meeting. Jennifer made dinner, bathed Emma, read her 3 stories, and tucked her daughter into bed. Then she went to the guest room, opened her laptop, and drafted an email to one of the divorce attorneys she'd researched. She wrote, "My name is Jennifer Anderson. I've been married for 5 years and have a 2-year-old daughter. I'm trying to understand what my options are for separation and eventual divorce. Most of our assets are in my husband's name from before the marriage. I left my career 3 years ago to be a full-time parent. I need to know what a realistic path forward looks like. Can we schedule a consultation?" She read it 3 times. Then she saved it as a draft and closed the laptop. She wasn't ready to send it yet, but writing it felt like lifting a weight she'd been carrying for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand upright. Progress was happening in increments so small they were nearly invisible, but it was happening. Jennifer was waking up. The coffee meeting with Marcus Webb happened on a Tuesday morning at a quiet cafe halfway between their respective areas of town. Jennifer arrived 10 minutes early, ordered a latte she was too nervous to drink, and sat by the window watching people pass on the sidewalk. She felt like an imposter, like someone pretending to be professional when really she was just a stay-at-home mother whose most recent accomplishment was getting her toddler to eat vegetables without a meltdown. But when Marcus arrived, his greeting was genuinely warm, and within 5 minutes they were talking like no time had passed at all. He'd left Collins & Associates 3 years ago to start his own consultancy focusing on supply chain optimization for mid-sized manufacturers. Business was strong. He was growing, and he needed help. "I'll be honest," Marcus said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "I remember exactly how you think, Jennifer. You see patterns other people miss. You can look at a system and identify inefficiencies without getting lost in irrelevant details. That's rare, and I need someone who can do that for a client project I just took on." Jennifer's heart raced. "I haven't done that kind of work in 3 years, Marcus." "So, you didn't forget how to think, did you?" She smiled despite herself. "No." "Then we're good. Look, I'm not asking for full-time commitment. I'm asking if you want to take on a single project, maybe 20 to 25 hours of work total spread over the next month. Remote, flexible. You work when you can. If it goes well, great. If it doesn't, no harm done." Jennifer wanted to say yes immediately, but the logistics loomed. Childcare during work hours, Robert's potential reaction, the fear that she'd fail, that she'd prove right everyone who assumed mothers couldn't balance work and parenting effectively. "Can I think about it for a day?" she asked. "Of course, but Jennifer, for what it's worth, you'd be doing me a favor. I need someone good. You're good. That hasn't changed." They finished their coffee talking about mutual acquaintances and industry changes, and when they parted, Marcus handed her his card. "Email me when you're ready, or if you decide you're not. Either way, it was really good seeing you." Jennifer drove home in a daze. Someone wanted her professional opinion. Someone valued her skills. Someone saw her as more than a wife or mother. She wanted this, wanted it with an intensity that scared her. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Jennifer found Robert in his home office reviewing documents. "I'm going to take the consulting project Marcus offered," she said from the doorway. "It's remote and flexible, 20-ish hours of work over the next month. I'll manage it around Emma's schedule." Robert looked up, mildly surprised. "You're really doing this?" "Yes." "Okay." He shrugged. "Just make sure it doesn't interfere with your responsibilities here." "Your responsibilities, not our responsibilities. Not the household we share. Your job." Jennifer nodded once and left the room before she said something she couldn't take back. That night, she emailed Marcus and accepted the project. And then she opened the draft email to the divorce attorney, read it one more time, and hit send. The response came the next morning. Professional, kind, offering a free 30-minute consultation to discuss her situation and options. Jennifer scheduled it for the following Thursday at 10 a.m., a time when Robert would be at work and Emma would be at her mother's house for their weekly visit. She marked it in her personal calendar, not the shared one Robert occasionally checked, just hers. And for the first time since the gala, Jennifer felt something that resembled control. Not over Robert, not over the marriage, but over her own path forward. The performance was ending. The silence was breaking. And the woman she used to be, sharp, capable, worthy, was beginning to remember herself. The attorney's office was in a renovated building downtown, all glass and clean lines and the kind of understated elegance that suggested competence without arrogance. Jennifer sat in the reception area on Thursday morning, her hands folded in her lap, her pulse steady despite the enormity of what she was about to do. Margaret Lawson came out to greet her personally. She was a woman in her mid-50s with silver hair cut sharply at her shoulders and eyes that managed to be both warm and assessing. "Mrs. Anderson, thank you for coming. Let's talk in my office." The consultation room was comfortable. A desk, 2 chairs, a window overlooking the street below. Margaret gestured for Jennifer to sit and settled across from her with a legal pad and pen. "Tell me what's brought you here," Margaret said simply. And Jennifer did. She talked about the marriage, the slow erosion of partnership into performance, the conditional affection, the public humiliation at the gala. She talked about Emma and the fear of custody battles and the financial reality that most of their assets were Robert's from before the marriage. She talked about wanting to leave but not knowing if she could afford to. Margaret listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes, nodding at intervals. When Jennifer finished, Margaret set down her pen and leaned back. "First, I want to say that what you've described is emotionally difficult, and I'm sorry you've been navigating it alone. Second, you do have options. Let me walk you through what separation and divorce would realistically look like in your situation." For the next 20 minutes, Margaret explained custody law, asset division, spousal support. She outlined timelines and processes and costs. She was honest about what would be complicated and what would be straightforward. Given that you've been the primary caregiver for your daughter and you left your career to support the family, you'd likely be awarded primary physical custody with a reasonable visitation schedule for your husband. You'd also be entitled to spousal support, at least temporarily, to help you reestablish financial independence. The amount and duration would depend on several factors, but you wouldn't be left destitute. Jennifer felt something loosen in her chest. What should I do next? Continue documenting your role as primary caregiver. Keep records of your husband's schedule, his involvement with your daughter, any relevant communications. Open financial accounts in your name if you haven't already. Start thinking about where you'd live post-separation, and if you're considering returning to work, even part-time, that strengthens your position. It shows you're taking steps towards self-sufficiency. Jennifer nodded. She'd already started some of this. "You don't have to file immediately," Margaret continued. "But when you're ready, we can move forward. I handle these cases with the goal of minimizing conflict when possible, especially when children are involved. Mediation first, litigation only if necessary." They talked logistics for a few more minutes. When the consultation ended, Margaret walked Jennifer to the door. "You're not alone in this, Mrs. Anderson, and for what it's worth, the fact that you're here, asking questions, planning carefully, that tells me you're stronger than you think you are." Jennifer left the office with a folder of information and a strange sense of clarity. The path forward was difficult, but it existed. She wasn't trapped. She had options. She picked up Emma from her mother's house and spent the afternoon at the park, pushing her daughter on the swings and watching her navigate the jungle gym with fearless determination. "Higher, Mama," Emma shouted from the swing. Jennifer pushed her higher, watching her daughter's hair fly back, hearing her delighted laughter, and thought, "I'm doing this for you, so you never think love is supposed to hurt." The consulting project consumed Jennifer's evenings and Emma's nap times for the next 2 weeks. Marcus had sent her the client brief and relevant data, and she dove into the work with a focus she'd almost forgotten she possessed. The project involved analyzing a manufacturing client's supply chain to identify cost inefficiencies and bottlenecks. It required the kind of systematic thinking Jennifer had always excelled at, breaking down complex systems, spotting patterns, building models that revealed hidden problems. She worked at the small desk in the guest room, spreadsheets and frameworks filling her laptop screen, and felt muscles in her mind flexing after years of atrophy. It was challenging without being overwhelming, familiar without being repetitive. She finished the analysis in 12 days and sent Marcus a detailed report with recommendations. His response came within an hour. "Jennifer, this is exceptional. Exactly what I needed. The client is going to be thrilled. I'm sending you payment today, and I'd like to discuss a second project if you're interested. You're really good at this. I hope you remember that." Jennifer stared at the email, at those words, "You're really good at this," and felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Competence, value, professional worth that had nothing to do with her appearance or her role in someone else's life. She responded immediately, accepting the second project. That evening, when Robert asked how her little project was going, Jennifer said it had gone well and she'd been offered another one. Robert barely looked up from his phone. "That's nice. Don't overextend yourself." Jennifer didn't bother explaining that she'd just saved a manufacturing company a projected $180,000 annually. Robert wouldn't understand the significance, and she was tired of translating her accomplishments into language he might respect. She was also becoming aware of something important. She didn't need Robert's validation anymore. Marcus's respect, the client's satisfaction, her own sense of competence, those mattered. Robert's dismissiveness was just noise. The second project came with a higher rate. Jennifer completed it in 2 weeks. Marcus sent a third. By the end of the month, Jennifer had earned nearly $4,000, and her calendar was filling with client work. She transferred every payment into her separate account. The balance grew. It wasn't enough to live on yet, but it was a foundation, proof that she could support herself and Emma if she needed to. Robert never asked how much she was making. He'd framed the consulting as a hobby from the start, and his disinterest meant Jennifer had space to build something real without his interference. She started attending Rachel Kimura's weekly professional development meetup, a gathering of women in business who met Thursday mornings for coffee and conversation. Jennifer paid her mother to watch Emma during those 2 hours and told Robert it was a parenting support group. He didn't ask questions. At the meetup, Jennifer met women who were navigating careers and families and refusing to apologize for wanting both. She absorbed their strategies and their stories. She contributed her own insights, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. One Thursday, a woman named Vanessa mentioned she was filing for divorce. She said it matter-of-factly, without shame, explaining that the marriage had required her to make herself smaller and she was done shrinking. The group listened without judgment. They offered resources, shared their own stories of difficult choices and hard-won independence. Jennifer didn't share her own situation, not yet, but she listened, and she felt less alone. 6 weeks after the gala, Robert came home from work with news that shifted everything into motion. He found Jennifer in the kitchen preparing dinner while Emma colored at the table. "I finally locked down the meeting with Donovan Hayes," Robert said, unable to contain his excitement. "Not just a meeting, a dinner, next Thursday at Marcello's. It's the final step before he decides on partnership." Jennifer looked up from the cutting board. "That's good." "It's more than good, it's critical." Robert loosened his tie, poured himself a bourbon. "Spouses are invited. I need you there, Jennifer, and I need you to make a real effort this time." This time, as if her presence at the gala hadn't been effort, as if she hadn't spent hours preparing only to be publicly humiliated. "What kind of effort?" Jennifer asked evenly. "Look nice, be engaged, support me. This is important for our future, for Emma's future." Our future. The possessive plural that erased her individuality. Jennifer set down the knife and turned to face him fully. "I'll be there." "Good. Wear something elegant. And Jennifer—" He paused, his tone shifting into something that might have been concern if it weren't so conditional. "Maybe hit the gym a few times this week. You've been doing that consulting work, so I know you have energy." The comment landed exactly as he intended it. A reminder that her body was still a project, still being evaluated, still falling short. 2 months ago, Jennifer would have absorbed that comment in silence, would have felt shame, would have promised to try harder. Now she just looked at her husband and felt a cold, clarifying distance. "I'll wear something appropriate," she said, her voice neutral. "Dinner's ready in 10 minutes." She turned back to the cutting board, and Robert, satisfied that he'd made his expectations clear, took his bourbon to his office. Emma looked up from her coloring. "Mama, why does Daddy talk like that?" Jennifer's chest tightened. Her daughter was young, but not too young to sense tension, to register the way Robert spoke to Jennifer versus how he spoke to everyone else. "Daddy's just stressed about work, sweetheart. It's not about you." But it was about Jennifer. And Emma was watching, learning what marriage looked like, what a woman should tolerate. That night, after Emma was asleep and Robert was in his office, Jennifer sat in the guest room with her laptop and made a decision. She would go to the dinner, but not to perform for Robert, not to make him look good or meet his expectations. She would go because Donovan Hayes would be there, the man who'd witnessed her humiliation at the gala and registered it like it mattered. The man whose business philosophy, from what she'd researched, was built on ethics and respect rather than exploitation. She was curious what kind of man ran a billion-dollar enterprise on moral principles. Curious if he remembered the gala. Curious what he saw when he looked at her now. Jennifer wasn't interested in Donovan romantically, wasn't looking for rescue or validation from a different man, but she wanted to be in a room where someone might see her as whole, where competence mattered more than appearance, where respect was the baseline rather than something earned through performance. So she would go to the dinner, and she would be fully, unapologetically herself. Whatever came next would come. The week leading up to the dinner felt surreal. Jennifer went through her routines while preparing internally for something she couldn't quite name. She cared for Emma, completed a consulting project, attended the Thursday morning meetup, and researched Donovan Hayes. What she found surprised her. He'd built his wealth from nothing, starting with a single residential property renovation in his 20s and scaling into commercial development over 2 decades. But unlike most developers, Hayes had a reputation for ethical labor practices, community investment, and walking away from profitable deals when the partners didn't meet his moral standards. He'd been profiled in business journals not for his net worth, but for his model, proof that you could build significant wealth without exploiting people. He was 42, unmarried, intensely private. No scandals, no tabloid presence, just a steady track record of doing business differently. Jennifer found herself oddly reassured by this. If Robert lost this partnership, it wouldn't be because Hayes was petty or vindictive. It would be because Robert's firm didn't meet the ethical bar. And based on what Claudia Reeves had mentioned at the gala, those wage theft allegations that had been quietly building for months, Robert's firm had problems that had nothing to do with Jennifer. On the day of the dinner, Jennifer dropped Emma at her mother's house in the afternoon. Her mother noticed something different about her. "You seem calm, centered." Jennifer smiled. "I think I am, Mom." "Is everything okay with Robert?" Jennifer hesitated. She hadn't told her mother about the attorney consultation or the consulting work or the future she was building in the margins. But her mother had raised her, had watched her shrink, and she deserved honesty. "I'm figuring some things out," Jennifer said carefully. "But I'm okay, better than I've been in a long time." Her mother studied her with the knowing gaze of someone who'd lived long enough to recognize strength when she saw it. "You call me if you need anything, day or night." "I will. Thank you for watching, Emma." Jennifer drove home and spent the next 2 hours getting ready. She chose her outfit carefully, a deep green dress that fit her body as it was now, not hiding it, not apologizing for it, just honoring it. Simple jewelry, low heels she could walk in comfortably, makeup that made her feel polished but not costumed. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see the woman who'd fled the gala in humiliated silence. She saw someone who'd spent 2 months remembering her worth, someone who'd stopped performing, someone who was about to walk into a room and refuse to shrink. Robert came home at 5:30, already anxious. He changed into an expensive suit, checked his appearance multiple times in the mirror, and barely acknowledged Jennifer except to give her a once-over. "You look good," he said, sounding mildly surprised. Jennifer didn't thank him, didn't smile, just said, "Are you ready?" They drove downtown in tense silence. Robert rehearsed talking points in his head, his fingers drumming the steering wheel. Jennifer watched the city pass outside her window and felt strangely calm. This marriage was already over. She just hadn't made it official yet. Marcello's was the kind of restaurant where deals worth millions were closed over wine that cost hundreds. The lighting was warm, the tables spaced for privacy, the staff trained in elegant discretion. A hostess greeted them at the entrance and led them to a private dining room in the back. Donovan Hayes was already there, standing near the window with a glass of red wine. He turned when they entered, and his expression was calm, unreadable, exactly as Jennifer remembered. "Robert, Jennifer, thank you for coming." He shook Robert's hand first, then turned to Jennifer and extended his hand to her as well. His grip was firm, but not aggressive. His eye contact was direct. "It's good to see you again, Mrs. Anderson." "And you, Mr. Hayes," Jennifer said evenly. There were 3 other couples in the room, potential investors and their spouses. Introductions were made. Jennifer recognized Claudia Reeves, the nonprofit director who ran a housing advocacy organization. They'd met briefly years ago. The group settled around the table. Robert positioned himself strategically near Donovan. Jennifer ended up seated across from Donovan, with Claudia to her left. The first course arrived. Conversation began with safe topics: recent travel, the unusually warm fall, a new museum exhibit. Robert was animated, working the room, performing confidence. Donovan listened more than he spoke, asking occasional questions that were thoughtful and precise. Jennifer watched the way he paid attention, not performatively, genuinely. He seemed to assess not just what people said, but what their words revealed about who they were. Halfway through the second course, the conversation turned to the development project that had brought them together. Donovan described his vision: a mixed-use property with market-rate units, affordable housing, community spaces, and locally owned retail. The goal, Donovan said, is to build something that serves the neighborhood rather than displacing it. Long-term sustainability over short-term profit maximization. One of the other investors, a man named Greg Feldman, asked about projected returns. Donovan answered directly, providing numbers that were solid but not extravagant. You won't see maximum ROI in the first 5 years, but if we structure this correctly, with community as stakeholder rather than obstacle, it becomes generative. That's when real value compounds. Robert jumped in eagerly. Exactly. That's our approach at Anderson Development. Community engagement, sustainable growth, long-term value creation. Claudia Reeves, the nonprofit director, turned to Robert with polite skepticism. I'm familiar with your firm's recent projects, Mr. Anderson. I wouldn't characterize them as particularly community-focused. The table went quiet. Robert's smile tightened. I think there may be some misunderstanding. We work within all applicable regulations and prioritize economic viability, which ultimately benefits everyone involved. Claudia didn't back down. Her voice was calm but firm. Economic viability for whom? The Riverside project displaced 80 low-income families and replaced them with luxury condos that sit half-empty. The Parkside development used subcontractors with documented wage theft violations. Those aren't misunderstandings. They're patterns. Robert's face flushed. He tried to deflect, to reframe. Those allegations are still under investigation and haven't been substantiated. Our firm takes compliance very seriously. The investigations have been ongoing for 7 months, Claudia said, and the complaints are well documented. I've spoken with some of the affected workers myself. The more Robert talked, the weaker his position sounded. He was floundering, and everyone at the table could see it. Donovan didn't intervene. He simply watched with that same calm assessment, letting Robert's responses speak for themselves. Then Donovan turned to Jennifer. His gaze was direct, his tone genuinely interested. Mrs. Anderson, I recall you worked in corporate strategy before stepping away to raise your daughter. What's your perspective on balancing profitability with community accountability in development projects? The question landed like a spotlight. The entire table turned to look at Jennifer. Robert looked startled, as if he'd forgotten she was there. Jennifer met Donovan's eyes and saw something in them. Not pity, not performance. An actual question. He wanted her answer. She took a breath. She hadn't been asked a professional question in public in 3 years, but the answer was there, structured and clear, because her mind had never stopped working. I think the fundamental mistake most developers make is treating community impact as a cost to be minimized rather than an asset to be cultivated, Jennifer said. Her voice was steady, confident. When you build with a neighborhood instead of on top of it, you reduce opposition, increase local investment, and create long-term stability that protects your returns. The upfront engagement requires more time, but you're not fighting lawsuits or managing reputational damage, or trying to fill units in a development nobody wants to live near. Ethically and financially, it's the stronger approach. She spoke for 90 seconds, referencing stakeholder theory and case studies and frameworks she'd studied years ago but never forgotten. The table listened. Greg Feldman nodded thoughtfully. Claudia smiled with clear approval. Donovan's expression remained neutral, but there was something in his eyes. Acknowledgement. Respect. That's a sophisticated analysis, he said, and accurate. It's rare to meet people who understand that ethics and profitability aren't oppositional. Robert, sitting beside Jennifer, looked like he'd been struck. His wife, the woman he'd spent 2 years dismissing as someone who'd let herself go, who'd been out of the industry too long to matter, had just articulated a more nuanced position than anything he'd offered all evening. He tried to recover. Jennifer's always been good with theory, of course. The practical application in real-world development is more complex. It was subtle, but everyone heard it. The condescension, the implication that her insight was academic rather than actionable. Jennifer looked at her husband. Something inside her went very still. I've also been doing consulting work for the past 2 months, she said calmly. Supply chain optimization and operational strategy. The practical application hasn't been a problem. Robert blinked. She'd told him about the work, but he dismissed it so thoroughly that being confronted with it now, in front of people he was trying to impress, clearly caught him off guard. One of the other investors asked Jennifer about her consulting clients. She answered. Claudia asked about her approach to stakeholder engagement. Jennifer answered that too, drawing on the projects she'd completed for Marcus. For 10 minutes, Jennifer was the center of the conversation, and Robert sat beside her in silence, his jaw tight, frustration radiating from him like heat. When the conversation finally shifted to other topics, Robert excused himself to the restroom. The moment he left, the energy at the table changed. Less performative, more honest. Donovan leaned back in his chair and addressed the group. I want to be transparent about my criteria for partnership on this project. I don't work with people whose values don't align with mine. And values aren't what you say in pitch meetings. They're how you treat people when you think no one important is watching. He let that settle, then continued. I've conducted due diligence on all the firms being considered. Some findings are concerning. Wage theft allegations that have been building for months. Corner cutting on safety. Workplace cultures that prioritize extraction over dignity. I'm not interested in partnerships built on exploitation, regardless of projected returns. He didn't name Robert's firm specifically. He didn't have to. Claudia spoke up. I've worked with Mr. Hayes on 2 previous projects. His standards are high, but they're consistent. When he says ethics matter, he means it. He's walked away from profitable deals because the partners didn't meet his bar. One of the other investors asked what that bar was. Donovan's answer was simple. Treat people with dignity, pay fair wages, tell the truth. Don't build wealth by extracting it from people with less power than you. It's not complicated. When Robert returned to the table, the conversation had moved on. But the damage was done. He knew, Jennifer could see it in his face, that he'd lost this partnership. Donovan Hayes was not going to work with his firm. The rest of dinner passed in strained politeness. Dessert was served. Coffee arrived. People made small talk about nothing consequential. Robert tried once more to salvage the situation, offering assurances that his firm could meet whatever standards were required. Donovan listened politely. I'll be in touch. It was a dismissal. Everyone recognized it. When dinner ended, Donovan walked each couple to the door personally, thanking them for coming. When he reached Jennifer, he held her gaze just a moment longer than politeness required. It was a genuine pleasure hearing your insights tonight, Mrs. Anderson. I hope you continue the consulting work. The field needs people who think the way you do. Thank you, Jennifer said. And then, because she needed him to know she understood what he'd done, she added quietly, for everything. Donovan nodded once. Understanding passed between them without words. Then Jennifer followed Robert out to the car. The moment they were alone, his fury erupted. What the hell was that? Jennifer kept her voice calm. What was what? You made me look like an idiot, showing off, acting like you're some kind of expert when you've been out of the industry for years, talking about consulting work like it's a real career. Jennifer turned to face him. Something in her expression made him stop mid-breath. I answered a question I was asked. I participated in a professional conversation. That's what you told me to do when you insisted I come tonight. I told you to support me, not undermine me. How did I undermine you, Robert? By making it obvious you think you're smarter than me. Jennifer stared at her husband. The absurdity of the statement settled over her like cold water. He wasn't angry that she'd embarrassed him. He was angry that she'd demonstrated competence, that she'd reminded everyone in that room she was more than his accessory. I think we need to have a serious conversation, Jennifer said quietly. But not here, not like this. Robert started the car, his hands gripping the wheel too tightly. They drove home in heavy silence. When they pulled into the driveway, Robert killed the engine and sat there, staring straight ahead. Are you trying to leave me? The question was raw, unexpected. For a moment, Jennifer almost lied, almost deflected, almost performed reassurance one more time. But she didn't. Yes, she said. Robert turned to stare at her, shock and anger warring on his face. Because of one comment at a gala? Because I'm honest about wanting you to take care of yourself? Because you've spent 2 years treating me like I'm not enough, Jennifer said, her voice steady. Because your love has conditions I can't meet. Because every time I'm myself, you act like I'm failing you. That's not true. It is true, Robert. You criticize my body. You dismiss my work. You measure my value by how well I make you look. And tonight, when people finally saw me as a whole person, you were angry, not proud, angry. Robert's jaw worked. You're overreacting. No, Jennifer said, and her voice was quiet but immovable. I'm done underreacting. She got out of the car and walked into the house. Robert followed, his footsteps heavy. So what? You're just going to destroy our family because you're upset. Jennifer turned to face him in the entryway. I'm not destroying anything. I'm acknowledging what's already broken. You just didn't notice because I've been holding it together alone. This is insane. We have a child, Jennifer. We have a life together. We have an arrangement. Jennifer corrected. One where I make myself smaller so you can feel bigger, and I can't do it anymore. I won't. Robert ran both hands through his hair. You're not thinking straight. You're emotional, stressed. Maybe you should talk to someone. Don't do that, Jennifer said, her voice sharp for the first time. Don't diminish what I'm saying by pretending I'm irrational. I've thought about this more clearly than I've thought about anything in years. So what do you want? A divorce? Jennifer took a breath. I want a separation. I'll stay in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk about next steps, but I'm done pretending this marriage is something it's not. Robert stared at her. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked genuinely lost. I don't understand. I gave you everything. A home, security, a good life. You gave me things, Jennifer said quietly, but you never saw me, and I need to be with someone who does, even if that someone is just myself. She walked upstairs, leaving Robert standing in the hallway. She didn't look back. In the guest room, Jennifer sat on the edge of the bed and released a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 2 years. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding. But beneath the adrenaline was something else. Relief. She'd said it. She'd set the boundary. She'd chosen herself, and the world hadn't ended. Jennifer pulled out her phone and texted her mother. Can Emma stay with you tonight? I'll explain everything tomorrow, but we're okay. Her mother's response was immediate. Of course, sweetheart. Take all the time you need. I love you. Jennifer set the phone down and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere in the house, she heard Robert moving around. A door slammed. His anger reverberated through the walls. Let him be angry, Jennifer thought. She'd spent 2 years managing his emotions, absorbing his disappointment, making herself smaller to accommodate his ego. She was done. Tomorrow she would call Margaret Lawson. She would start the formal process of separation. She would figure out custody schedules and living arrangements and how to support herself and Emma. But tonight, she just lay in the quiet guest room and felt the strange, terrifying, liberating sensation of choosing her own wholeness over someone else's comfort. It felt like breathing after years underwater. It felt like freedom. Let me pause the story here and speak directly to you, not as a narrator, but as someone who needs you to hear something that might change your life. If Jennifer's story is resonating with you, if you're recognizing yourself in her silence or her years of performing or her slow disappearance, I need you to understand something fundamental. You are not broken. Jennifer wasn't broken when her body changed after childbirth. She wasn't broken when she stepped away from her career to raise her daughter. She wasn't broken when she endured 2 years of conditional love, hoping that if she just tried harder, Robert would finally see her worth. She was never broken. She was just in a relationship with someone who needed her to believe she was. Maybe you're in that place right now. Maybe you're with someone who loves you only when you meet impossible standards, who withdraws affection when you're not performing perfectly, who makes you feel like your value is something you have to earn, rather than something you inherently possess. Let me tell you what Jennifer learned, what I need you to carry with you into every relationship, every space you occupy. Your worth is not negotiable. It doesn't increase when you lose weight or achieve something or say the right thing. It doesn't decrease when you're tired or struggling or going through something hard. Your worth is a constant. It exists because you exist, and anyone who treats it as conditional is not offering you love. Love doesn't ask you to shrink. Real love doesn't come with terms and conditions buried in fine print you never agreed to. Real love sees you whole, messy and brilliant and exhausted and capable, and says you're enough exactly as you are. Jennifer spent 2 years trying to earn Robert's approval. She changed her eating, her exercise, her entire sense of self. She made herself smaller in every possible way, and it was never enough. Because the problem wasn't her. The problem was that Robert measured her worth by what she could do for his image, not by who she actually was. When Jennifer finally understood that, when she chose herself, Robert accused her of being selfish. But choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. It's dignity. It's the most loving thing you can do, not just for yourself, but for everyone watching you, your children, your friends, anyone who needs to see what self-respect actually looks like. Here's the truth. Nobody tells you when you're in the middle of it. Walking away from conditional love is terrifying. It means releasing the life you thought you'd have. It means facing logistics that feel impossible. It means people will judge you, will say you didn't try hard enough, will imply you're giving up too easily. But staying in a relationship that requires your erasure is worse than all of that. Because every single day you stay, You teach yourself that your needs don't matter, that your voice doesn't deserve to be heard, that love is something you earn by disappearing, and that lesson will destroy you from the inside out. Jennifer's story isn't about revenge. It's not about punishing Robert or finding a better man or proving anyone wrong. It's about a woman who forgot her own worth and then remembered it, who chose the hard, frightening path of honoring herself over the familiar path of performing for conditional approval. That choice is available to you too, right now, today. You don't have to wait until the humiliation becomes public or the pain becomes unbearable or you have every answer figured out. You just have to take one step. Open that separate bank account. Schedule the consultation. Reach out to the old colleague. Say no without apologizing. Set the boundary. Stop performing. The life on the other side of that choice won't be perfect. Jennifer's path included a smaller apartment, financial uncertainty, hard conversations, lonely nights. She had moments where she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. But she was whole. And whole is better than comfortable. Whole is better than safe. Whole is better than a marriage that looks perfect from the outside while erasing you from the inside. So here's my prayer for you today, wherever you are in your own story. I pray you find the courage to stop shrinking, to stop performing love for people who only offer it conditionally. I pray you recognize that devotion without reciprocity isn't partnership. It's extraction. I pray for clarity, the kind that cuts through manipulation and excuses and shows you exactly what someone's love is worth by how they treat you when you're struggling, when you're imperfect, when you're most authentically yourself. I pray for resources, that the job appears, that the friend shows up, that the money stretches further than it should, that the logistics work out in ways you can't predict but desperately need. I pray for strength, not the strength to endure what's destroying you, but the strength to walk away from it. The strength to disappoint people who never really saw you anyway. The strength to choose the unknown over the unbearable. I pray for peace, the kind that comes from knowing you honored yourself, that you didn't teach your children to accept conditional love, that you built a life where your worth isn't constantly up for debate. And I pray you find people who love you whole, who celebrate your brilliance without needing you to dim it, who see your body as evidence of everything you've survived and created, not as a problem to solve, who hear your voice and want more of it, not less. You deserve that kind of love, not someday when you're different. Right now, exactly as you are. Jennifer learned that her body wasn't a failure. It was a testament. It had grown and nourished a human being. It had survived a marriage that tried to reduce her to measurements. It had carried her through the hardest decision of her life and delivered her to the other side. Your body is a testament too, to everything you've survived, everything you've created, everything you've carried. Stop apologizing for it. Stop trying to earn the right to exist in it. It's yours. It's worthy. And anyone who makes you feel otherwise doesn't deserve access to it. One more thing. If you're staying because you're afraid, I understand. Fear is real. The logistics are real. The uncertainty is crushing. But the cost of staying is also real. And that cost compounds daily, erasing you piece by piece until you can't remember who you were before you started performing. Jennifer almost stayed. She almost convinced herself it wasn't that bad, that all marriages have rough patches, that she was being dramatic. But then she looked at her daughter and realized she couldn't teach Emma that a woman's worth is measured by her waistline. What are you teaching the people who are watching you? What are you teaching yourself? You are enough. You were always enough. And the moment you choose to believe that, to build your life on that foundation, everything changes, not easily, not instantly, but inevitably. Walk in that truth. Choose yourself, and watch what happens when you stop performing and start living. You're not alone in this. Jennifer's story is proof that the other side is real, that wholeness is possible, that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's sacred. I'm believing that for you today, even if you can't believe it for yourself yet. 1 year later, Jennifer woke to morning light filling her apartment and the sound of Emma singing to herself in the next room. She lay still for a moment, savoring the quiet, and realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd woken up anxious. The past year had been the hardest of her life. It had also been the best. The divorce finalized 4 months ago after 8 months of mediation. The settlement was fair. Jennifer had primary custody of Emma. Robert had visitation every other weekend, though he frequently canceled for work. Jennifer received temporary spousal support that gave her breathing room while she built her consulting practice into something sustainable. Robert had started his own development firm after being quietly pushed out of Anderson Development. The wage theft investigations that had been building for months finally concluded with findings that damaged the firm's reputation. They distanced themselves from Robert to protect their own standing. His new firm was struggling. Jennifer heard about it occasionally through mutual acquaintances, and she felt something close to pity. But mostly she didn't think about him at all. Her life now was smaller in square footage, but exponentially larger in every way that mattered. The apartment was a 2-bedroom in a safe neighborhood with good schools. Jennifer had painted Emma's room lavender. She'd filled the living room with plants and books. She'd created a workspace by the window where morning light fell across her desk. Her consulting practice was thriving. She had steady clients, strong rates, and a growing reputation for strategic precision. Marcus Webb referred people regularly. Donovan Hayes had hired her for 3 additional projects, each one reinforcing that her professional skills hadn't atrophied. They'd just been dormant. Donovan had also introduced her to other ethical investors who valued her approach. Her calendar stayed full. Her income, while not extravagant, was enough. She was supporting herself and Emma. She'd also started teaching. A local university invited her to guest lecture on sustainable development models, standing in front of students, sharing what she knew, answering their questions. It reminded her why she'd loved this work in the first place. But the most profound change wasn't professional. It was internal. Jennifer had stopped measuring her worth by external metrics. She'd stopped weighing herself months ago, stopped tracking every calorie, stopped apologizing for existing in her body. She ate when hungry, moved when it felt good, dressed in clothes that were comfortable rather than acceptable. Her body had changed over the year. Some weight came off, some didn't. She genuinely didn't care the way she used to. When she looked in the mirror now, she saw a woman who'd survived something brutal and emerged whole. That felt like victory in ways a number never could. Emma was flourishing. She loved preschool, had friends, seemed completely unbothered by her parents living separately. Jennifer had worried about the impact, but Emma's therapist assured her that what children need is stability and presence, not perfection. Emma had both: a mother who was calm and whole and present, a father who showed up when he could. It wasn't ideal, but it was honest, and honest was infinitely better than the performance they'd maintained before. This morning, like most mornings, Jennifer made coffee while Emma played. She reviewed emails, finalized a client proposal. Then she made breakfast. They ate together at the small kitchen table, Emma chattering about building a spaceship from blocks, Jennifer listening with the kind of attention that felt easy now that she wasn't running on empty. After breakfast, Jennifer got Emma ready for preschool. The drive was short. Drop-off was routine. Emma hugged her fiercely before running to join friends, and Jennifer watched her go with fullness in her chest that never got old. From preschool, Jennifer drove to meet Rachel Kimura at their usual coffee shop. Rachel had proposed they co-lead a workshop series for women re-entering the workforce. Jennifer had said yes immediately. Rachel was already there with lattes and a folder of plans. "You're going to love this," Rachel said. "We have funding for 8 sessions. The interest is incredible." They spent an hour designing curriculum, dividing responsibilities, strategizing how to make the workshops accessible and practical. It felt good to build something with another woman, to collaborate without ego, to use her skills in service of something meaningful. When they finished, Rachel studied Jennifer with open affection. "You look genuinely happy." Jennifer smiled. "I am. Good. You deserve it. After everything, you deserve all of it." That afternoon, Jennifer attended a panel on ethical investing. Donovan Hayes was speaking. She sat in the audience and listened to him discuss building businesses that honor people rather than exploit them. After the panel, Donovan found her. "Mrs. Anderson, good to see you." "You as well. Excellent presentation." "Thank you. I wanted to ask, are you available for another project, affordable housing development? I need someone who understands both financial modeling and community impact. You'd be ideal." Jennifer felt the familiar thrill of being seen for her competence. "Send me the details." They discussed scope briefly. Then Donovan said something unexpected. "Also, if you're interested in something permanent, I'm creating a director of strategic development position. Full-time but flexible for parenting. I think you'd be perfect, but I understand if consulting suits you better." Jennifer's heart skipped. A permanent role, with Donovan's organization, doing work aligned with her values. A year ago, she would have accepted immediately, desperate for security. Now she took a breath and said, Let me think about it. I'm in a good place with consulting. I want to make sure any change serves me and Emma. Donovan nodded without offense. Of course, the offer stands when you're ready. They parted warmly. Jennifer walked to her car feeling something powerful. Agency. The ability to choose based on what she wanted, not what she thought she should want. That evening, after picking Emma up and making dinner and giving her a bath, Jennifer sat in the quiet living room with tea and reflected. She thought about the woman she'd been at that gala, the one who absorbed Robert's cruelty in silence, who spent years trying to earn conditional love by erasing herself. That woman felt distant now, not a stranger, just an earlier version who'd forgotten her worth and needed to lose everything to remember it. Jennifer didn't regret the journey. She regretted the pain and wasted years, but she didn't regret leaving, didn't regret choosing herself, because this life, small and imperfect and entirely hers, was worth more than the beautiful prison she'd been living in. Her phone buzzed. A text from Donovan. Gala next month for the housing project. You're invited. No pressure. Jennifer smiled. A gala. The last one had ended in humiliation, but she wasn't that woman anymore. She typed, I'll be there, because she could walk into any room now knowing her worth wasn't up for debate. She could stand beside powerful people without shrinking. She could take up space without apologizing. Jennifer set her phone down and looked around her small apartment, at the consulting files on her desk, at Emma's artwork on the walls, at the future unfolding in ways she couldn't predict but no longer feared. She'd chosen herself, and that choice cost her everything she thought she wanted in exchange for the one thing she needed: her wholeness, her voice, her life. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything. That's Jennifer's story, a woman who was told her worth was conditional and chose to believe something different, who walked away from a marriage that required her erasure and built a life honoring her wholeness. But it's not just Jennifer's story. It's the story of everyone who's had to choose between staying small and stepping into their light. Maybe it's your story too. If this journey moved you, if you saw yourself in Jennifer's struggle or strength or choice to reclaim what was always hers, do something for me. Don't let this be the last story you hear. Subscribe to the Billionaire Romance family. This isn't just drama or watching powerful people clash. It's about truth, about people who were underestimated, overlooked, erased, and found their way back to themselves. Every story here is about more than relationships. It's about power and dignity and choosing to stop performing and start living, about recognizing your worth when the world says you're not enough, about love that doesn't ask you to shrink but celebrates you whole. Hit that subscribe button now. Join people who believe your story matters. Your voice deserves to be heard. You don't have to settle for conditional love. We're building a space where every story reminds you you're not alone. Transformation is possible. Choosing yourself is never selfish. It's sacred. Turn on notifications. The next story might be exactly what you need. The mirror showing your worth. The nudge helping you take that first step toward the life you deserve. Share this with someone who needs it. Someone still performing, still shrinking, still hoping that trying harder will make love feel like love. Let Jennifer's story remind them wholeness is possible. Choosing yourself is brave. The life on the other side is real. Leave a comment. Tell me what hit home. The moment she stopped performing, the rebuild, walking away, realizing her daughter was watching. I read every comment. Your stories matter. This isn't just content. It's connection, community, and you're part of it. Thank you for listening, for being here, for believing stories like Jennifer's and yours deserve to be told. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, remember, you are enough. You were always enough. And the life you're meant to live is waiting on the other side of choosing to honor that truth. Subscribe to the Billionaire Romance family. Let's keep walking this journey together. Your story isn't over. It's just beginning. And I can't wait to see who you become when you finally choose yourself.